All right, let's get right into it. Today we're talking about one of the most incredible, most controversial figures in all of history, Napoleon Bonaparte. This is a man whose sheer ambition and genius, and yeah, his ego, didn't just change Europe, he forged it into something new.
And really, that quote says it all, doesn't it? Forget the battles and the crowns for a second. His impact was so huge that he basically grabbed the continent by the scruff of the neck and dragged it into the modern world. So how on earth did one man do all that? Well, let's break it down.
You know, our story doesn't start in some Parisian palace. Nope, it starts on the rugged island of Corsica, with a young guy who was, for all intents and purposes, a total outsider in the very country he would one day rule. What's so wild about his early years is just how much he didn't fit in. He was born Napoleone Bonaparte. Sounds more Italian than French, right? Well, when his dad got him into a French military academy, the other kids made his life miserable. They bullied him for his thick accent, for his name, for being a poor islander. So what did he do? He escaped into books. He devoured everything he could on math, history, and especially the art of war. That isolation, it turned his mind into an absolute weapon. Then came the French Revolution. For most, it was pure chaos. But for a brilliant, ambitious young officer with zero connections, chaos is a ladder. Napoleon saw the revolution as his big chance, a way for a guy with talent, not a fancy last name, to climb all the way to the top.
And you can see his strategy taking shape right here. It was a perfect blend of battlefield genius and shrewd political moves. He famously saves the government with what he called a whiff of grapeshot, just mowing down a royalist mob. Then he marries the incredibly well-connected Josephine. He even Frenchifies his name to sound less like an outsider. It all works. He gets exactly what he wants, command of an army.
Okay, so now he has an army. And this is where Napoleon the general transforms into Napoleon, the historical force of nature. His ambition is about to just explode onto the world stage. His first campaign in Italy was, well, it was legendary. He took this beaten-down, starving army and led them on a whirlwind of victories against the powerful Austrians. But here's the key part. He didn't wait for orders from Paris. He started acting like a head of state, signing his own peace treaties, redrawing the map of Italy. The politicians back home were getting nervous, but what could they do? He was a national hero.
So here's the big strategic problem he's facing. He's beaten the armies of Europe on land, but his biggest rival, Great Britain, is an island, protected by the most powerful navy in the world. You can't just march an army across the English Channel. So what do? You gotta get creative.
And Napoleon's solution was just audacious. He decided to invade Egypt. The idea was to cut Britain's hugely profitable trade routes to India. But in a move of pure brilliance, he didn't just bring soldiers. He brought an army of scientists, artists, and scholars to study ancient Egypt. It was a military invasion and one of the greatest scientific expeditions in history, all rolled into one.
And the results were a mixed bag, to say the least. On land, his army was unstoppable. The Battle of the Pyramids was a total rout. But out on the water, it was a disaster. The British Admiral Horatio Nelson found the French fleet and just annihilated it. Just like that, Napoleon and his entire army were trapped in Egypt.
So what does he do? In an incredible act of political spin, he actually abandons his army, sneaks past the British ships, and gets back to France. He totally controlled the narrative, playing up his victories and burying the news about his stranded army. And it worked. The people were sick of their corrupt government, and they saw him as a savior. He used that wave of popularity to overthrow the government and take power for himself. And just look how fast this happens. In 5 short years, he goes from general to first consul to finally emperor, and that coronation scene is legendary. He invited the Pope to Notre Dame, but right at the crucial moment, he took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head. The message couldn't be clearer. My power comes from me and me alone.
And with that crown firmly on his head, the Napoleonic era truly begins. For about a decade, he wasn't just the leader of France. He was, without a doubt, the master of Europe.
The year 1805 sums up the whole situation perfectly. At sea, the British destroyed his navy for good at the Battle of Trafalgar, so any dream of invading England was over. But just a few weeks later on land, Napoleon pulled off his absolute masterpiece, the Battle of Austerlitz. He crushed the combined armies of Austria and Russia. So you have this stalemate. Britain owns the oceans, but on the continent, Napoleon is king. And he used that power to literally remake the continent. I mean, the Holy Roman Empire had been around for 1,000 years. Poof, he got rid of it. He created new countries that were loyal to him. He put his own brothers on the thrones of other nations like they were his personal employees. And to hurt Britain, he created this thing called the Continental System, basically a giant economic blockade to try and bankrupt them.
This was the absolute peak, the height of his power. But you know how these stories go. It's often at the moment of our greatest success that we make our biggest mistakes.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? You dominate an entire continent, your armies look invincible. So how does it all fall apart so fast? Well, it all comes down to two catastrophic errors in judgment. And here they are, two massive campaigns happening at the same time that would just bleed his empire dry. Think of it like this. One was a festering wound that would never heal, and the other was a single devastating blow. Together, they were fatal.
See, in Spain, he thought he could just swap out their king for his brother Joseph. Easy, right? Wrong. The Spanish people rose up in this brutal, bloody guerrilla war, and then came the Battle of Belen. For the very first time, a French army was actually defeated in a major battle. That news spread like wildfire across Europe. The myth was broken. Napoleon's armies could be beaten.
And while Spain was draining him slowly, he made his biggest gamble ever, the invasion of Russia. Just look at that number, over 600,000 soldiers. It was the largest European army in history, the legendary Grand Armée, all marching east to teach the Tsar a lesson.
But the Russians were smart. They wouldn't give him the big, glorious battle he wanted. They just kept retreating, deeper and deeper into Russia, burning the land as they went. Napoleon took Moscow, but it was a ghost town. And then, the winter hit. The retreat from Moscow is one of the most horrific stories in military history. His army wasn't beaten by soldiers. It was destroyed by cold, by starvation, and by the sheer, endless Russian landscape.
After the disaster in Russia, the empire was on life support. Napoleon's enemies could smell blood in the water. The end was coming, and it was going to be fast.
And it was just one blow after another. First, all his enemies teamed up and finally beat him at the huge Battle of Leipzig. He was forced to give up his throne and was exiled to the tiny island of Elba. But then, and you can't make this stuff up, he escaped. He landed back in France, and the people flocked to him. He was back in power. This last-ditch effort was called the 100 Days, and it all came to a dramatic end on a rainy battlefield in Belgium called Waterloo.
This time, his enemies weren't taking any chances. They sent him to St. Helena, one of the most remote islands on the entire planet, a volcanic rock in the middle of the South Atlantic. And that's where he died, 6 years later, a prisoner. What an end for a man who once held a continent in his hand.
But his death on that lonely island is not the end of the story. Not even close, because the things he built and the things he broke are still with us today. So what's his real legacy?
You see, beyond all the wars, his impact was revolutionary. He created the Napoleonic Code, a clear, simple set of laws that is still the foundation of the legal system in France and dozens of other countries. He championed the idea of meritocracy, that you should get a job based on how good you are, not who your father was. And, ironically, as his armies marched across Europe, they spread the very revolutionary ideas of liberty and nationalism that would eventually topple empires just like his.
So that brings us back to the big question. Who was this guy? Was he an enlightened modernizer who dragged Europe into a new age of reason and law? Or was he a power-hungry tyrant whose ambition led to the deaths of millions? The fascinating thing is, he was both. And that incredible contradiction is why we're still talking about him and arguing about him 200 years later.